Anyway, remember that as we're creeping up on the end of the semester, if you've got extra credit you want to do, you can earn up to 30 points of extra credit by watching a movie and then letting me know what was historically accurate and historically inaccurate about it. That's in your syllabus. If you go to a history exhibit of some kind or a virtual exhibit of some kind, you can write up a short paragraph about that and submit that for 5 points. Or if you go to a place lecture, and in a lot of cases you'll be required to go to a place lecture by another teacher. If you go and then you write something up for me, that's also 5 points. You can earn up to 30 extra credit points that way. But everything has to be turned in by May the 7th, so something to think about. Any other questions before we get started talking about pluralism?
Me.
Yes?
Can I use, like I went to the state capitol, I mean the US Capitol about 2 years ago, can I use something that I filmed from that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Any experiences that you've had observing, you know, attempts to preserve history out in the wild?
Working at the museum.
Yeah, you work at the museum, so you should have no problem drumming up extra credit from this, which is good, but it's not going to save you from those papers. You still have to do those.
Oh, I could do the Alamo.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I went to the Alamo long before I was a history major. I really want to go back now because when I went, I didn't know anything about it. So
I went about 6.5 years ago.
yeah, and Chris works at the museum here in town. I'll bet a lot of you don't even know we have a museum here in town, but it's well worth visiting. It's actually very cool. There's a lot of really cool exhibits in there. If you just want to make an afternoon, go and visit. Hey, I'm comparing it to places I've been that are much worse. Okay, but there's stuff to see. So, you know, just make a quick visit. Or the Ace of Clubs house, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Ace of Clubs house is fun to tour. But honestly, if you go to almost any local church here in town, somewhere in one of their hallways, they've got an exhibit about their history. If you go and you observe it and then you write a paragraph about it and give it to me, that actually counts. So there are probably places you go all the time that have history exhibits. So don't miss out. That's all. Okay. All right. So let's talk about pluralism. Pluralism. I'm excited. Okay. So does anybody right off the bat, do you all know what pluralism is? Just so I know how far I have to cover this. Does this term mean anything to anybody? Can you infer what it means from its from context? More than one of something. Yes, absolutely. Good. Yeah. It's a pretty easy word to remember because it's got that. Okay. So pluralism is the ability of multiple ideas to exist in the same place at the same time. Okay. Pluralism is political. It's also philosophical. It's also literary. Literary pluralism is the idea of, you know, multiple kinds of ideas all pouring into literature at the same time. So it's all, wherever you see it used, it means basically the same thing. Things living side by side and coexisting is pluralism. When we're talking about political pluralism, a lot of times what you're talking about is the fact that there are elected people who have a job to do, but there are also lobbyists and corporations and individuals and other groups that help make those decisions. We're not talking so much about that. That's political pluralism. All the people that are responsible for a bill getting passed that affects your life. For example, gun control is a very pluralistic topic because you've got the Congress people who are making decisions. You've got the Supreme Court that's making decisions about the Constitution, but you've also got the NRA, and you've also got anti-gun right groups who are all pouring into this one sort of decision-making process. That's not so much what we're talking about, but it's important that you know that that's sometimes what people mean when they say pluralism. What we're talking about is philosophical pluralism, the idea that ideas can coexist. Okay, we had this Enlightenment wave that came across the Western, you know, civilized world in the 1800s, 1700s. We had Romanticism, which swept across it. And now we have connected everything through globalism. All these places have kind of, you know, tied themselves together. And what happens when you network a whole bunch of different cultures together is that you end up with pieces of different cultures all trying to coexist. Isaiah Berlin, who is a pluralist philosopher, said, "Let us have the courage of our admitted ignorance," because that's actually what you need in order for a pluralistic society to exist, is to acknowledge that your ideas might not be the only ones. And your ideas, while right to you, might be able to live side by side with somebody else's ideas who seem wrong to you, that they might be able to coexist inside the same. I want to differentiate between two different theories of pluralism, the melting pot and the salad bowl. In a melting pot society, multiple cultures pour in, mix together, melt together, and produce a whole separate but singular culture. A lot of things get lost. A lot of things get lost in the process. Hi, Jordan. How are you?
Currently, at the end of the year, even for preschoolers, is like packed every week with family events and student events.
It's May. It's May. It's not. It's April, but anyway, the spring in schools is always like, oh God, take a break. Anyway, I'm gonna love it this semester because we're done before May.
But you have.
But I don't actually have a kid in school anymore because I'm homeschooling now. So it's like all of those end of year things I could actually participate in. Anyway, okay, so a melting pot, everything sort of pours together, gets mixed up, and the culture that gets produced is like a mix of all of those things minus the things that won't mix. And what happens in the melting pot society is that things do get lost, you know, cultural things get lost. In a salad bowl, there's more survival of the individual cultures, but how they can mix together in one space without damaging each other is where all of the tension is. The idea of a pluralist society is not new. There have been pluralist attempts at pluralist societies since the ancient world. Greece was a pluralist society. They, because they were spreading across the Mediterranean, because they were with Alexander the Great, they were like going into India and they were going into the Middle East and going into Northern Africa. They were bringing back all of these elements of different societies with them and trying to coexist with those in there. Rome was a very pluralist society. You could worship whatever god you wanted to, as long as you also acknowledged that Caesar was a deity, you know. So as a result, there were all kinds of cultural practices within the one umbrella of the Roman Empire. But there has actually never been a perfect pluralist society. There has never been a society where true pluralism actually took place, but there have been lots of attempts. In the ancient world, we have evidence that there were religions living side by side, even in ancient times. This is a transcript of a tapestry. Somebody, you know, illustrated it to make clearer what was happening on the tapestry, to demonstrate that there were several different belief systems in India in the ancient world. And this is a stone that demonstrates Jewish people living side by side with pagans in first century Israel. And this is the Magdala stone. So there have been attempts. And usually in pluralism, because we're talking about ideologies, a lot of time what we're talking about is religions. Because we're talking about cultures, a lot of times we're talking about the things that are most precious to those cultures. So we see things like that in, like, for example, Granada on the southern tip of Spain, or in connection with the northern edge of Africa. There was a time before the 1500s where Granada was a big pluralist society. They had Jews and Christians and Muslims living side by side with North African tribal emissaries, and all doing business together and living side by side in homes. And you can still kind of see it in the architecture of Granada. You can still kind of see the residual parts of all of those cultures. And then, you know, Isabella and Ferdinand and their predecessors swept in and pushed everything but Christianity out of the southern tip of Spain, and sort of, you know, wiped out the whole pluralist society of Granada. A lot of times what you find is the reason that there is a pluralism is because there are multiple ideas that are combating each other, and forces that are trying to make theirs the only one, trying to defeat that. And as a result, there's a lot of bloodshed. So we have several moments in ancient history where we have people pointing out that it would be okay for us to mostly just get along if we could all just take a breath and step back from this. One of them, of course, was Buddha, who looked at who imposed on the Hindu caste system the idea that every caste had people in it that could go towards enlightenment, and that they needn't suffer and be ascetics to make that happen. And that was the middle way. In Queen Elizabeth of England's time, Protestants and Catholics were killing each other over which one was the true religion. Should people be attached to the Catholic Church in Rome, or should they not? And she proposed via media, the middle way, which was everybody really needs to promise to stay true to the Anglican Church, but other than that, you can practice Christianity any way you want to. I would not open windows into men's souls, is what she said when she proposed the via media, the middle way. So there have been attempts to carry out sort of flavors of pluralism, try to let things live side by side. We like to think of America as one of the ones that really, really tried hard to do it. And one of the reasons for that is Alexander Hamilton, who wrote the bulk of the Federalist Papers, which defended the Constitution to the public. The Constitution was coming under criticism for not being articulate enough about specific points. It was too loose, it too loosely defined some things. And one of the defenses that Alexander Hamilton had, Federalist number 10, talks about how in a pluralist society, factions are going to form. And a lot of people think, well, we need to make sure to write whatever laws we need to make sure factions don't form. But if you actually read Federalist number 10, he says, factions are both a good thing and a bad thing, but in factions is where you find growth. It's where you find progress. So factions will cancel each other out. They'll rise to power, they'll gather power, and then they'll be checked by the minority. And then they'll splinter and form new factions. And in all of this is how what is right for our country will emerge. Okay, so this is kind of a radical idea in the 1700s. There were individualism and there was all this stuff, you know, all this new learning going on, but the idea that what we want is a country where the laws are not solid. What we want is a country where factions can form and knock each other out. What we want is a constant battle. That was kind of radical, but it is actually how that works. So the idea is pluralism protects the common good by continuing the argument, okay? In a pluralistic society, you never get to the point where you're like, oh, we figured it all out. Now let's put it down on paper and everybody abide by it and will enforce it. In a pluralist society, that never happens, because in pluralist societies, there's always movement of ideas. So it's not a state of achievement, but a state of tension. You want that tension because that is how new problems get addressed and how, you know, the dialogue keeps going. Peace is not found in the solution, it's found in the dialogue. It's found in the ability to continue to converse. In a pluralist society, the ability to continue to introduce new ideas never goes away. And therefore your idea, which the gross majority of people might agree with you that you're right about it, will continue to be challenged, which makes ideas stronger. This is something a lot of people don't realize. If you have an idea and you think you're, you know, right about it, then it should stand up to a constant barrage of challenge, not stand alone on a hill with a wall around it so that it can't be attacked. So what is it that makes pluralism go away? Whatever it is that kills the dialogue. So we're actually not, I tricked you, we're not actually here to talk so much about pluralism. We're here to talk about the things that make pluralism go away. So before we get into that, do you think America is a pluralist society?
Yeah,
You do? Okay. Why?
but they're trying to make it all Christian. Or they're trying to say that we're based on
It's sort of something new.
Okay, all right. So it is at the moment a pluralist society, but there are forces that would like to see it less so.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, let's I know we always tend to drift towards conversations about religion when you're talking about pluralism and anti-pluralism, because those are the ideas that people rally around the strongest. But what about non-religious ideas? Is America a pluralistic society when it comes to like political ideas? Grudgingly? All right, okay.
Right to believe in that.
Okay, all right. So for example, if I was to stand up in here and say, I'm your history teacher and you know, these are your grades and this is what I do and this is the amount of authority I exhibit over you. Also, I'm a communist, just so you know. what happens to me as a teacher? Realistically, what happens to me? Yeah, nothing. Right, because I live in a society where if I decided to stand up here and say, also, I personally believe in communism. I'm actually a communist, or I'm a Satanist, or I'm an atheist, or whatever. Yeah, but there was a time when if I had said, I am a capitalist and a Christian and all those things myself, but I can kind of see the point the socialists are trying to make. What would have happened to me in the 50s?
FBI got us when we walked through the door.
Yeah, there was a time where not only would I have gotten fired, like a lot fired, like really, really fired, but there's a possibility that I also would have been hauled up in front of a committee and made to point to all of my friends who were also communists and then blacklisted from every industry. And that was an attempt to end pluralism in America, but it didn't work. It didn't work because today I can stand up here and do that. And I'm not going to because I'm not a communist. I'm a history student. I know communism doesn't work, but I could, is my point. And that's proof that America is still is a pluralist society, not because everybody's ideas are okay, but because we're still talking about them. Because there are still no ideas that are off limits to talk about. There are still no things that we just, can't talk about. And all of that is sort of in the writing of the Constitution originally. It's all kind of written into the beginning. So if you ever get the feeling like it's closing in around you and your particular ideas are getting tromped on and all of that kind of stuff, remember that you still live in a country where you can have them. So let's talk about the countries where you can't. Every time a country turns communist, one of the first things that it does is begin to eradicate alternate ideas.
I mean, China is still.
Yeah, but it starts right from the beginning. One of the first things that happens is that churches get knocked down. Churches get repurposed. I'm going to tell you a funny story about this radio tower in Berlin because I saw it when I was a kid and I thought it was the coolest thing. East Berlin had a radio tower in it that was basically a great big spire with a big ball on the top. And I wish I had a picture of it so I could show you. But it was built with funds that all of the churches in Berlin had gathered to rebuild their churches after World War II. And they had been gathering these funds for some time. But then East Berlin became, part of East Germany, which was controlled by the Soviet-influenced East Germany, which meant it became communism. The Communist Party seized all of the funds, and instead of rebuilding a church, they built a radio tower. And it was just a big ball on a spire, this radio tower. What was really cool was that because of the way they had built it accidentally, 3 or 4 times a day, the sun would hit it just right, that a huge cross would illuminate on the outside of this ball. Because they built it in a sphere out of panels, and so the light would hit it just right, and there'd be a big cross across it. 4 times a day, or I think 2 times a day, but anyway. And people would sneak out of their houses and out of the businesses to go look at it and then go back into their houses. That's an example of an attempt at eradicating pluralism, is bringing everybody under the same ideology and re-educating them when they don't. The problem is, of course, in order to do that, you have to find out that people have a different ideology, and the only way to do that is if they speak. And then you have to convince them not to have it, and the only way short of just killing everybody who has that ideology is re-education camps.
China says it's re-education camps. They have quite a bit of black market on organs.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talks.
Jordan has found a way to be cannibalistic again.
No, it's just organ transplant. My brother-in-law, when he took his kids back to China to get their teeth done, he literally told them, "We're not leaving you in the car by yourself because you'll get kidnapped by the black market." These
Okay.
4-year-olds.
I'll take your word for it. I wouldn't. One of the things that has to happen in order for a society to limit ideas to one ideology is that they have to kill off everybody that has another ideology. And in order to do that, to make that okay, you have to eradicate the idea of individual worth. And once you have eradicated the idea of individual worth, why not sacrifice, whole villages of people to famine? They're just numbers, right? So in every country that turns communist, that's one of the places where pluralism goes out the window. They try to make it go out the window anyway. When the Soviet Union fell, one of the reasons the Soviet Union fell was because Gorbachev instituted glasnost, which was the freedom of the press, which revealed that there were actually quite a few alternate ideologies living in the USSR at the time. And they finally had a voice, but they were always kind of already there.
It's just interesting that he did that. That he allowed it.
He was a believer. He believed that people chose to be part of the strong Soviet Union and communism, that what they wanted was to rebuild it back to its original strength. He was a believer. He was very young for his office. I mean, he was in his 50s, so he was new. He was I guess would he have been baby boomer?
Yeah,
He would have been a baby boomer when baby boomers were still pretty young. So this is an example of this is Jerusalem. What do you see?
you see a mosque and a temple.
Right? Okay. So in this one picture alone, you see an Orthodox Christian church. You see the Dome of the Rock, which is a massive Muslim mosque. And what is this? This is the wall, which is holy to the Jews.
And apparently the Muslims too.
This should be a very pluralistic city. It should be, because these are holy sites for they're all people of the book, so they're not that different. But actually, if you dig far enough in Jerusalem, you start to see pagan temples too, because it was built right on top of pagan temples. So you begin to see other things like that. But ancient Greek pagan temples. This should be a very pluralistic city, but is it?
No.
Is it? I mean, let's think about this for a minute.
Remarkably, yeah, it is.
What is it that makes it pluralist?
The Israelis keeping control of the situation, not letting it blow up.
Or, okay,
Well, the younger generation is being a lot more lenient.
why are you able to point to these buildings and say what they are?
They're so holy that they're not going to, I mean,
Oh, 'cause
Nobody
they
had to
haven't
touch
been
them.
destroyed.
Right, they haven't been destroyed. They're still there. That's what makes it still a pluralist city, right? However, the factions that want to control the city, one of the things they want to do is wipe out the holy sites of the other factions. So what makes Jerusalem such a hot topic place, such a hot button place, I guess is probably what I mean, because Hot Topic is a shopping mall. But what makes Jerusalem such a constantly in the news is the fact that factions rise up who want to take control of the city and push other ideas out. But that hasn't happened yet. They exist in a state of constant tension. So here, let's do a little case study in anti-pluralism. Let's look at what it actually looks like when a group actually starts to push other ideas out. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about Al-Qaeda. First of all, remember that Al-Qaeda was formed out of a coalition of forces that came to support the Mujahideen. I can't say that word unless I'm looking at it. But American CIA supported forces that were pulled together specifically to push Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. And they were militaristic. And as they came together into training camps, they began to exchange ideas and found that some of them had a much stricter interpretation of the Quran and the writings of Muhammad than others did. It's in that pool that we start to see really strict interpretations of Sharia law, because Islamic law up until that point, we should impose this on everybody else, factions were actually driven out of the mainstream of Islam up until this point. So Wahhabi, for example, was a caliph who didn't just believe it was enough for everybody under his umbrella to practice Islamic, holiness, but believed that it was important that any country that bordered on them also did. And if that meant going in with, weapons and forcing that to happen, he was stomped in his time. But in these training camps in Afghanistan, his teachings began to resurface and kind of get, dusted off and brought to the forefront and actually looked at by people who were trying to find a way to pull together so that they could, have these military actions. In the midst of all of this, Osama bin Laden gets involved. And we talked about it, but I don't think I ever actually looked it up where his money came from. You said construction, I think. Yeah, but whatever it was, he came from a very rich family. He brought all of his resources into this endeavor. And they did successfully push the Soviet Union out, partly because of the assistance of the CIA, partly because of their own organization, their ability to train and organize, but also because the Soviet Union crumbled. Okay, so they did actually manage, and once they were there, and military force that had been assembled, at the end of that confrontation, they didn't go, well, that was fun. Let's go home. I'll see you guys later. Let's do this again sometime if we ever need to. They stayed together and began to dream of the possibility of forming their own Islamic state, their own Islamic nation, and pull together all of these across borders, different origins. Most of the people who participated in this were Sunni Muslim, which we study more in World Civ 1 what that means, but Sunni rather than Shia. But in 1990, because Kuwait suddenly had a reserve of oil, Saudi Arabia under the Saud family discovered oil in the 70s. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait under Saddam Hussein, and partly because of oil that was happening that was diverting oil from Iraq and pouring it into Saudi Arabia, and partly because, there were all kinds of reasons why Iraq invaded. They had reasons that they said, and then reasons that were probably true. And that's a whole class all by itself. But when that happened, bin Laden took this force that he gathered in Afghanistan and he offered it to the Saudi king and said, we will come in and help you expel the Iraqis, who by the way are Shiite. We will help you expel them, and then we will maintain control of the oil supply and all of that kind of stuff.
Iraqis were Sunni.
Mm.
Iranians are Shia. That's what they thought.
Okay.
And it was construction.
And it was construction. Okay. The point was that the Iraqi Muslims were not the practitioners that the Afghani, the Al-Qaeda forces that bin Laden had gathered were. So he offered to bring this military force into Saudi Arabia to protect it from Iraq. And the Saudi king said, no thanks, we've got this, and invited America in instead. This was an affront to everything that Al-Qaeda believed in. The idea of bringing American troops to defend the site of Mecca and Medina, the holiest places in Islamic religion, the idea of bringing them in and just letting them exist and tromp all over these holy sites. And bin Laden became very vocal about it, and as a result, he got his Saudi passport revoked, and the Saudi king basically, kicked him out of the country. So in 1996, bin Laden issued a series of fatwas against America, its allies, and all the Jahiliyyah, the godless. And his fatwas, what you call that, an instruction, a mission, like a holy quest, like a
Holy call.
A calling, yes, like a call to arms. And it was broadly the language of his fatwas was broad enough that pockets of extremists took his fatwas and used them as excuse to carry out terroristic acts, which he loved. That's what he wanted. What he wanted was terroristic acts against America and its allies. And broadly, its allies were anybody who doesn't hate America. So these fatwas were actually carried out against even Islamic people who were cooperating with America. So it was very, very broad. And that was based on an idea that a very strict interpretation of the Quran was possible, and that forcing everybody to adhere to that strictness was possible. Somewhere in the midst of that spawned a new movement called the Taliban. Okay, Taliban just means students, so it sounds harmless enough, but it's based on a series of teachers that become stricter and stricter. So Salafi, the pious predecessors, the idea was that the holiest Islamic people, the holiest Muslims, were the people that actually walked side by side with Muhammad in his day. And the closest you can get as a Muslim to being holy is to act as closely like them as you can. And one of the defining characteristics of Muhammad's closest followers was they were militant. And they were aggressive. They actually pushed conversion aggressively. Muhammad's men were soldiers. They weren't just philosophers, disciples discussing things, they were actually militant. They actually raised military forces. So if you wanted to be among the holiest of Muhammad's followers, in order to act as closely to his followers as you could, you needed to act like the pious predecessors, which meant imposing Islam aggressively, militarily, on people who didn't believe. Wahhabism actually also incorporated the idea of punishing people for screwing it up. So within your own pool of believers, actually punishing the people who don't follow the very strictest possible interpretation of Sharia law. Okay, and Qutb, which is this guy here, who was imprisoned in his own time and died in prison. But his writings actually called for an examination of this last war thing that's supposed to happen. Basically, if you read Muhammad's teachings, you find in there evidence that Muhammad believes that at some point there would be a showdown between the holy people and the non-holy people, and that when that happened, Muhammad's followers would inherit the earth.
That's pretty much Revelation.
Well, what's interesting is that in Revelation, the followers of Christ don't think they're going to inherit the earth. They think they're going to not inherit the earth. They think they get to go to the new place. But Muhammad's belief was that the followers of Muhammad would sweep the world and take, control of the whole world. And Qutb's impression was, why do we have to wait for that to happen naturally? Let's just make it happen. And so he began, carrying out preachings that were very difficult for leaders to deal with. So he was actually in jail. But in the midst of this new pool of militaristic teaching, somebody unearthed him and dusted him off and brought him back. And that's how we end up with offensive jihad, aggressive offensive jihads against all of the godless, which is we have a responsibility to sweep across the world and kill off anybody who doesn't adhere to this. This is the only way to make this work is not to allow any kind of pluralism. That's why we're talking about it. Because even just the difference between a Muslim person who wears a veil and a Muslim person who wears a hijab, that's pluralist. Do you cover the face entirely or don't you? That's pluralist. So aligning everybody to this ideology, and probably in most Taliban, the place where this is most obvious is among the women. If you're a literature English person of any kind, I recommend at some point that you check out the book Persepolis. It's a graphic novel written by a woman in Iran after the Taliban took over. Where she lived in Iran, she grew up in a society that was, listening to rock and roll on their Walkmans and stuff, and going to the mall, and then all of a sudden one day they were in full veils.
If you look at the 70s, they look just like
Yeah, Iran was a modern culture until the Taliban took over, and somehow they've managed to make us forget that. A lot of Western cultures look at Iran and they're like, they've always been like this. But they haven't actually. It's just been since the Taliban took over. So if you're interested in finding out more about this, I recommend Persepolis. It's an easy read, except it's not.
Iranian or Afghanistan?
Iran. She was Iranian.
So they weren't a Taliban, were they?
Yes, they were.
Was Afghanistan.
Well, it spread into here. It spread into Iran. So what this is a picture of is a man whipping women for not having their
escort.
huh?
Not having their escort.
Not having their escort or not having their clothing on right. There have been instances in Taliban-controlled states of, let's see, there was a fire inside of a school and a girls' school. When all the girls ran out to save their lives, they got beat for not being dressed properly as they fled the building. Things like that. That's an attempt to eradicate pluralism, and that's what it takes to eradicate it, because you can't let even the smallest possible different ideology stand. I wanted to talk just for a second about the Islamic, you can call it Daesh, the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL. People argue over the name because they're not sure which one is going to be offensive. But the idea was that these ideas could come together and form an Islamic nation that was powerful in its own right. But everywhere that this happens, there are rebel forces inside a country that already has a government that are rising up and attempting to unite with other rebel forces in other governments, in other countries that are controlled by other governments, and then overthrow the governments that are there. There is no country that is Islamic, that is ISIS. There are countries that almost fell so completely to it that they might as well have been. But the idea of ISIS spread across a very, very wide area, and everywhere that it spread, it embraced this qutbism, this idea of we have a responsibility to overthrow everything that isn't us.
It's interesting because ISIS also destroys Muslim historical
Yeah, and actually they are
and
themselves extremist Sunni. So moderate Sunni, they overthrow. Shiite, they overthrow. Sikh, they overthrow. It's not just Christians, Jews, you know, whatever pagans, atheists, whatever other westernized people you might find. It's anybody that is not their specific flavor of Islam. And unfortunately, as a result of that, since they're the ones making all the news, people in countries where Islam is not the majority religion get the wrong idea of who the Muslim people are. You know, this is who they all are. And it's not actually, because they're killing their own people to demonstrate that they do not represent all of Islam, because they actually kill Muslim people too. But I don't know how we fall prey to that. These extremist viewpoints a lot of times tend to take, are not just pro something, they're anti something. For an example of that, Boko Haram is actually, the name of this organization actually means Western education is forbidden. That's actually what it means. But the idea of Boko Haram is to push out all the influences of Western education on the people of Nigeria and a couple of other countries that are bordering on Nigeria. But based on the belief that what has poisoned them, I mean, this is also an extremist Islamic faction. This is also extremist Islamic. But what has poisoned them has been specifically access to education from the West. Boko Haram started as an educational institution. It started as an organization that set up schools for training people in the proper way to live, you know, in the tenets of fairly strict Islamic religion, you know, which embraces education. The original, you know, Islamic, one of the pillars is education. But it started off as, but it had to compete with schools that were put in place by Western powers too. It had to compete with Christian schools. It had to compete with, you know, Nigeria is one of those places. It's right on the coast. It's right on the West African, sort of right there on the bulge of West Africa, which means that it has had lots of interaction with European countries, because that's one of the places people have gone to trade for slaves. So lots of European influence already. Churches like to set up there, missions, orphanages, American churches especially. So all of these things, coupled with some other kinds of disasters. In Syria, there was a drought, and that drought drove people off of their farm, off of their rural areas and into the cities. And the cities become overwhelmed and overloaded and riddled with crime. And then these forces came in and took over and caused widespread death and chaos. So there have been refugees fleeing from that and into, you know, across the Mediterranean into European countries. In about 2011, I think, maybe 2009, but around the late, you know, the first 10 years of the 2000s, refugees poured out of these places and into European countries, expecting to find pluralist societies when they got there, expecting to find places where they could fit. Did they?
Yeah.
How do you know?
I mean, they have assimilated, the UK is still super against them.
Yeah, but how do you know that the UK is super against them?
There are still quite a bit of riots.
Right. What does a riot tell you?
Small pockets of people that don't like it.
We wouldn't be able to hear it if it wasn't a pluralist society.
True.
the argument about the ideas would never take place. They would come in and immediately disappear into the society that was already there or be killed off doing it. I mean, that's the whole point of a pluralist society. The fact that they poured into Europe and then Europe had an opinion and we know what that opinion is, means that the ideas are still being discussed. That's by definition what pluralism is. So there have been several different, like, you can Google search this on your own, but everywhere that there has been a rural disaster followed by an urban flooding of people, followed by violent attempt to control that population, there have also been a refugee crisis following it shortly after that. And everywhere that a refugee crisis is poured in and taken place, there have been people who protested against it. This is a very, very common pattern. Can you think of other places where that's happened? Besides Syria and Europe?
Mexico here on the border.
Right here on the border, we have, because of crises that are taking place in Venezuela.
As I was saying, there's not Mexicans, it's not all these migrant caravans aren't actually really Mexicans.
No, they're coming through Mexico, but they're coming from other places.
Because we follow Mexican news, of course, but apparently the Mexicans they're starting to riot against the migrant caravans too, because at the beginning they let them come in and they were helpful, but then they trashed the place and they left.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the Mexican communities are like, no more.
Right.
Not you here anymore.
Haitians and Cubans.
So what's your motivation as a receiving country for trying to make refugees, trying to find a way to deal with refugees and make them welcome? What's your motivation for not just turning around, opening fire on them, kicking them right back out again?
Part of the world community.
Yeah, okay. You claim to be part of a world community. You claim to be a salad bowl or a melting pot, but then you're choosy about who you let into the salad bowl or melting pot. Yeah, there's ideological thing. But the absolute most practical reason is this. Everywhere that there is a refugee crisis, it's always followed by widespread youth recruitment into extremist groups. So everywhere that refugees can't find a shore to land on or a place to flee to safely, the youth are recruited into these extremist groups and they grow. We saw this in Cambodia when America bombed Cambodia and drove refugees off of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and into rural Cambodia. They ran right into the arms of the Khmer Rouge and into Pol Pot's control and became the army of slaughter that moved through Cambodia. We saw that happen. That was a thing that you can't ignore. And these are actual recruits for the Khmer Rouge. And I mean, look at them. They're little boys, basically. This is a picture of boys in a, well, this is a Mexican gang, but it's, I don't know that the picture is actually, but I think it's South American. I don't think it's Mexican, but in Africa, Al-Shabaab literally means party of the youth. It's actually the youth that are recruited into extremist Islamic, you can say that if you want to, but the truth of the matter is it doesn't take very long for a refugee with no place else to go, who has lost track of their whole family and to find family inside these recruitment areas. So they might have been forced to join to begin with, but it doesn't take very long to become assimilated when you're this age. So one of the biggest reasons for attempting to maintain that pluralism, for not trying to push out cultures as they pour in, is that failure to do so actually boosts recruitment. It actually causes a growth in Al-Qaeda, in what's the name of the Mexican gang everybody's so afraid of?
MS-13.
MS-13, yes. And groups like the Khmer Rouge, which isn't a thing so much anymore, but in groups like that, that's what happens. So what is it about pluralism that is so dangerous to extremists? I answered the question right on the board, so you can answer it. I just want you to sort of grasp the idea and give it back to me.
Opens up debate.
Right, okay. So the thing about anti-pluralism is that it is incredibly difficult to maintain. Extremism is incredibly difficult to maintain. You have to keep on top of it all the time. You have to maintain it with force. You have to enforce it. You have to police it. You have to constantly check to make sure that everybody is still, because the second you relax, there's always a possibility that an alternate idea will filter in, an alternate ideology will come in. But the reason that people go to it anyway, the reason that people go to extremism is because it feels safer on the surface to be, for everybody in a society to agree. I mean, think about how nice it would be if everybody in America believed the same things and all worked together all the time to maintain those same things.
They're trying.
And there are societies that actually, you know, say we need to wipe out all the people that disagree with us. There are actually factions inside the US that actually say that say what would be good for our country would be if we would just get rid of everybody who thinks this other thing. And the reason why that's not true is because that would require an immense amount of, okay, I'm going to say something really controversial, and I don't want to get in trouble for it. I don't. But this is college, and you're allowed to say controversial things. So y'all know that in my other career, I'm a Christian pastor, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I will never vote for a candidate who says, I want to make this a Christian nation. I will never vote for somebody who says that, because there's only one way to turn America into a Christian nation.
You took out that free will.
And that is to eradicate anybody who is not, to either force them to become Christian or to eliminate them if they don't. There's no other way to do it. Okay, so while I personally would love to see more people embrace the love and joy that comes with following Christ as I see, and I'm not preaching, I'm just saying this, it's my personal take on it is, you know, a lot of people's lives would be better if they had a good relationship with the divine. And in my world, the best way to express that is through Christ, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, while I would love to see that, I know that you can't force it to happen without widespread violence. So I will never vote for a candidate who makes that their platform, even though I myself am a Christian. And that's because to do so would eradicate pluralism. And there's only one way to do that, and that's through violence. So the other side of that is the reason why extremists are so afraid of pluralism is because it's tough to live with, because it's tough to stand side by side with somebody and say, this person stands for all the things that I'm against, but they have as much a right to be here as I do. You know, so that's a tough thing to ask of ourselves as, you know, a world, but the opposite requires eradication. So to anti-pluralists, pluralism is dangerous because any place where a dialogue can take place, new ideas can get introduced. So I was going to take this, I don't know what time it is. What are we?
19.
So I got like 5 minutes. I want to talk just for a second about Putin. And I was going to put him in the PowerPoint, but I didn't, because I thought maybe we'd just have the conversation instead. But
Don't have it in writing, he might come after you.
yeah, I'm not worried. I can take it. I just sit on him. Anyway, the thing about the way that Putin is handling Russia right now is that it requires the elimination of the media. It requires the elimination of freedom of the media. When Gorbachev came through with Glasnost and liberated the media, or tried to anyway, there was a period of unrest, we'll call it, in the USSR where things were very, very confused and things were very violent, and then trickled into something that was sort of oligarchic and kind of stepping towards capitalistic, and like the USSR was trying to find its feet, and then Putin began to rise. And as Putin began to rise, control of various media organizations fell under the control of Putin's friends. So what has happened in Russia, and that he has enforced punishments for missionaries who don't come from the Russian Orthodox Church. He has enforced punishments against, I'm sorry?
So journalists are poisoned.
Journalists being poisoned. His opponent Navalny is now in prison and is dying in front of everybody's eyes, and nobody can do anything about it. He's slowly dying and nobody can do anything. LGBT people in Russia didn't exist because Putin said so for a while. Now they exist, but they're going to concentration camps. All of this is an attempt to eradicate Western pluralism. All of this is an attempt to bring all of Russia under a single ideology. And he's going to fail Putin is going to fail, but he's going to take a lot of things down with him as he does. Why do you suppose it would be so important to somebody like Putin to do that? Because I have a theory, but I think I know what Putin wants.
Narcissistic authoritarian.
Yeah, he himself personally is a narcissistic person. He believes his way is the only right way for things to go.
He's living in the glory of the past Soviet Union. We want to bring that back.
I don't think so. I absolutely 100% disagree. I do not think Putin wants to bring back the Soviet
No,
Union.
he wants to bring back the strength.
I think what Putin wants to bring back is the Tsar.
And the strength.
He wants to bring back the Roman Empire as he wants to be the next. He wants to be Putin the Great. He wants to bring back the royalty.
If you look at artwork of him, he's always shirtless.
Right, because he went and got the blessing of the church. That's how you know. Because he went and got the Russian Orthodox Church to bless him. And if he was communist, that would be a thing that would go out the window because communists don't embrace religion. Marx said that religion was the opiate of masses. So anything that's communist gets rid of religion. So I think he wants to be the next emperor of Russia. I think he wants to bring back the empire. And in order to do that, he needs the complete support of the Russian people to make himself, declare himself emperor of Russia after so long of not having a monarch and having himself no family line. And the reason that he knows that's possible is because that's what Kim Jong-il did.
Not the support, the obedience.
He came out of nowhere, declared himself a monarch, and the people embraced him because there was no other ideology to battle. So y'all watch for that. You're young. You might live long enough to see it happen. I don't know. But you watch for it. He's going to make a move at some point. He's going to try to take.
In about 2 weeks.
Well,
Have you been paying attention to that?
yeah, I don't think so, Jabbar. I don't think Putin is trying to compete with Stalin. I think he's trying to compete with Peter the Great. I think he's trying to be an emperor. But I don't know. I think that he disagreed with a lot of what Stalin did. He thought Stalin was wrong about a lot of things.
Stalin took out religion.
One of the things is religion. Putin himself embraces the church and has the church embrace him. That's the other part of it. He makes the church publicly display how much blessing they lavish on him. He goes to ceremonies. He actually went to a ceremony, I think it was in Crimea, maybe? It was in the mountains somewhere. And the Russian Orthodox Church that was there actually did a communion ceremony and let him bless the communion and hand it out because it was holier than getting it from their own priests. Like this man who came from the countryside and the KGB. Anyway, so no, I think he wants to be emperor, divinely appointed emperor. All right, so next week we're going to talk about the revolutions that sweep across the world, different kinds of revolutions, and then we're going to talk about the now. On Thursday, we're going to talk about the connectedness of now, and then we're going to be done with this class. But does anybody have any questions about all this stuff we covered today? This is a very broad topic with a lot of trends.
I hope I pissed somebody off.
What do I think about cancel
That's the
culture?
same thing.
I think it's not a real thing.
I don't think cancel culture is.
No.
Ooh.
I think the idea that somebody can decide themselves that they're no longer going to shop somewhere does not make the thing stop
No,
existing.
but I mean, they try to.
Sure, yeah, they try to erode support for something.
People are starting.
By putting word out that it's not something that people should support, it immediately gives it, puts it. Okay, so, okay, let me use Mr. Potato Head as a, or I'm sorry, whatever, it's Potato Head, just Potato Head. Let's put that forefront, okay.
He's still Mr. Potato Head, the brand itself.
I didn't care about Potato Head toys until somebody said we're making a change to the Potato Head toys so that all of the pieces can be in the box at the same time and you can decide if your Potato Head is male or female. Until somebody said that, and then somebody else said, that's wrong. I hate that idea. We're canceling Potato Heads. Until that moment, it was not something I gave a second's thought about during the day. But now it is, which is why cancel culture is not a real thing, because all cancel culture actually does is bring the thing to the forefront and make everybody talk about it.
But people lose their jobs, their careers are ruined because.
What careers are ruined because Potato Head did this?
Potato Head, I mean, because of,
Oh, you're talking about like the app.
like Evergreen, did you hear about what, like Evergreen College, Eric Weinstein, did you hear about all that? I mean, stuff like that happens, it's just,
Yeah.
people just.
Right, the market
mob mentality.
and the market is forced to adjust,
I mean, it's just-
which is actually right at the root of the free market system. So like in the 60s, I guess 50s or 60s, there were vineyards that were using labor in a bad way. And as a result, all of the Methodist churches decided at the same time to stop buying products from that vineyard. Okay. As a result, in order to survive, the vineyard had to change its labor practices. Okay. Today, that would be called cancel culture, but they didn't shut the vineyard down. They just brought a conversation about the labor of the vineyard to the forefront where everybody could see it, and then force them into the position where they could either lose money or they can make a change, which is how free market labor works.
Because technically the big bosses don't have to change, but they're just tired of being talked about.
So I think cancel culture is it's a thing that people throw out as a way to stop dialogue on, a certain topic.
Awful.
What about her?
About what, she said something that really.
Oh yeah, she's been victimized by cancel culture because she's made transphobic remarks, and as a result, the LGBT community is turning their back on her, and she cries all the way to the bank. She's not canceled. Her books haven't been pulled off the shelf. She's just being talked about in an unflattering light, and she has a choice to make as a result of that. Does she want to change the way that she presents herself, or does she want to come full out and embrace it and probably garner the support of a whole nother ideology? I don't think cancel culture is a real thing.
There's extremes out there where it's abused.
I don't think it's possible.
anything.
I think the nature of what we call cancel culture actually makes conversations happen.
I think it's more prevalent in people than it is like businesses. If that makes sense. Like if you see like in the media, like they'll cancel like influencers and stuff. And like I think it more affects people themselves rather than like people canceling businesses.
Right. Okay. So like, what was his name? The YouTuber or Johnny Depp. That's easy. We can do Johnny Depp. That's easy. Or Amber Heard. They had domestic disputes, and whatever happened in those domestic disputes, which we don't actually know everything that happened, whatever it was, an attempt was made to cancel Amber Heard. Okay. So what does that mean for her? I got to tell you, I didn't even know who she was.
Yeah, she's still an awful man.
I didn't know who she was until cancel culture got a hold of her, and now I know who she is. She got so much free publicity from cancel culture that she is so decidedly not canceled. However, it does raise the question of, do our celebrities, do our movie stars actually have to abide by some kind of moral code in order to maintain an audience?
Like that Star Wars.
Because that's just the movement of free market.
They did to her was wrong. Well, they fired her and they was like, oh, cancel culture.
Oh,
Now she's
yeah.
getting hired by the complete right-wing side.
Yeah, and it is within
Yeah.
this privately owned studio's rights to decide who they decide to interact with. That's within their rights. So we're 5 minutes over our class time, and I'll bet Abigail's up there.
Dr. Wagner just.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so that's my opinion on cancel culture. It's not a real thing. Pluralism is good. Keep the dialogue going. That's the whole point of this entire lecture, is that pluralism is good for you. Y'all have a good day. Bye.